Thank you, Moderator. If I stand up, if I may. Mr. Moderator, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, colleagues, as my South African colleagues would say, all protocols observed. I represent today the local authorities and the members of the Global Task Force of Local and Regional Governments. And my own organization, the Commonwealth Local Government Forum, has local government and indeed central government ministry members in the 53 countries of the Commonwealth, which of course includes many small states and largely developing countries. I have a good colleague, a very distinguished Secretary General of the Commonwealth some years ago, who was speaking not fourth as this morning, but at the end of a very long list and a very long day, and people were getting a little bit tired. And so he said that I will now give you my address. My address is Marlborough House, London, Pall Mall. And he sat down, and here's my speech for the record. But I won't let you off so easily this morning, but give you a short summary of my speech, which is on the record, and perhaps just highlight some of the key points. Allow me first, colleagues and distinguished delegates, give you some basic principles on means of implementation and global partnership from a perspective of the local governments. Perhaps just to reiterate that we are not starting, of course, from scratch. I'm very grateful, Mr. Moderator, for some of the kind words you said in the context of Addis. And of course, I'm grateful for my colleagues on the panel, particularly the colleagues from civil society and the private sector, at the emphasis they have already placed on the local dimension. But of course, this was already highlighted in the Rio +20 outcome document and in a number of processes that have been taking place over the last few years. At the Commonwealth level, it's worth perhaps just reporting that the heads of government of the 53 countries at their summit meeting in 2013 in Sri Lanka specifically recognized the importance of localizing the SDGs. And in their statement of the leaders in 2014, the Commonwealth leaders again endorsed the concept of all levels of accountable government, of course, including the local, the regional, and the national. So I think there's a strong element of consensus in this area. But just very briefly, there are three basic principles I would like to highlight this morning. First of all, we feel that it's important that the multi-level governance and subsidiarity is emphasized to achieve more cohesive cities and territories. And clearly, this kind of multi-level interaction is essential. In my own organization, we have the mayors sitting alongside the ministers, and there's a very close collaboration. I think this needs to be reflected in the new architecture for post-2015. Likewise, as my other colleagues already said this morning, I think there needs to be a revised international governance mechanism which brings in the major groups, the major stakeholders, whether it's the private sector, civil society. Science, of course, has a very important role with climate change, and of course, from our point of view, the local government constituency. And just to emphasize that we take the view, I hope it's not controversial, that local government, like central government and provincial government, is a sphere of government, not an NGO and such. Although, of course, we do work very closely with our friends in the civil society sector and, of course, increasingly in the private sector. And for that work, we can offer an organized constituency through the Global Task Force, which I referred to already. Let me then briefly, and I realize we don't have too much time, touch on the means of implementation, and particularly the Addis process, which, as I say, the moderator and other colleagues have already referred to. Again, I think there is quite a bit of background, and I just want to highlight two specific United Nations documents and processes which we were closely involved with over the last year or so. One is the consultations which took place on localizing the post-2015 agenda, which accumulated in the Turin Communiqué of October 2014, which calls for sustainable financing mechanisms to localize the global development agenda and build responsive and accountable local institutions, including the full and effective participation of local governments in public expenditure allocation through fiscal decentralization, as well as new forms of financing for local development. And again, I take up the challenge put out this morning. I think it's a question of identifying what are the new forms of financing. And on the local government side, we feel very strongly that if local government is empowered, is capacitated, we can raise more revenue, we can raise through taxation, through municipal bonds, through other new innovations, also through direct access to ODA, significantly more funds for development at the local level, and local government is very keen to make its contribution in that area. The second sort of major document I just want to refer you to, and it's referred to in my written statement, is the Chisnall Outcomes Statement on Strengthening Capacities and Building Effective Institutions of February 2015. And this explicitly was the process on the consultations of strengthening capacities and institutions. And I'll just make one reference to it, where it says that local authorities and their associations, their national and international associations, must be empowered through capacity strengthening and enhanced institutional effectiveness to own and achieve development goals, stimulating community involvement and participation in local development strategies, as well as implementing modern management and planning technologies. So again, I think this is going to be very fundamental in the implementation mechanisms, and certainly on the local government side, Mr. Moderator, we hope very much that some of the excellent formulations in the current Addis Accord, especially paragraph 31, is maintained, because this does reflect, I think, what was agreed in the other UN processes at Chisnall and elsewhere. So in conclusion, colleagues, let me just say the localizing of the post-2015 development agenda is absolutely critical, and I think it's really a question of ownership. We've heard from our colleagues from, say, particularly the civil society, and I would very much echo some of his, my colleagues' points about mechanisms such as the participatory budgeting, which is a very good way forward in taking forward the localizing agenda. So localizing the agenda, and of course linked to that, territorial disaggregation in the data revolution. We need to get the right statistics, we need to get the right subnational data in place to make all of this happen. So my final point, you'll be pleased to hear, is that we are very committed to the process, like my other partners. Local and regional government want to commit not only for the next month, not only for the summit in September, but for the next 15 years. My own organization is having a major conference in Botswana of the Commonwealth in June, which will look at the local government vision for 2030 for the next 15 years, how we can work with the United Nations, with the member governments, with all our partners in the private sector and civil society to take this forward. There'll be some important milestones, such as the Habitat 3 conference next year, and of course all that will need to be built in. So with those few remarks, colleagues, as I say, I haven't given you the full address, but my address is also in London. I won't give you that. But let me just finish off with a famous quote from an American politician, which I think is relevant, and that was the quote I'm sure you've heard many times before, that all politics is local. Thank you very much.